Um, it's finally happening. I'm up here, finally. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Reid, and I'm a character animator working in both the motion design and TV animation industry. I want to say thank you to Dash Bash for inviting me here today and for being interested in whatever I have to say. I hope it makes sense to you today. But before we dive in, I want to talk to you a little bit about myself. I'm from Detroit, Michigan, where I graduated. Ooh, yeah, Michigan! Where I graduated from the College for Creative Studies with a bachelor's in animation. Woo, yeah, yay, Mel. But during the summers and parts of the school year, I enrolled in online classes like iAnimate and Animation Mentor to get more familiar with 3D animation. I also have a twin brother. His name is Ryan, and he works in the game industry. And what kind of twin would I be if I didn't put some of his work up here? So after graduating from the College for Creative Studies, I interned at Gunner, which is located in Detroit. In 2017, I was hired as staff up until 2020. And here's some works that you may be familiar with. And then finally in 2020, I took a leap and started freelancing. And here's where I work, in the corner of my apartment. So, yeah. Within the last year and a half, I worked with many studios like Chromosphere, Titmouse, Hornet, and Oddfellows. Okay, so here's what I'm going to talk to you about. I'm going to give you a little insight inside the mind of a Cel Animator, such as the principles of animation and the fundamentals of drawing, as well as the process of animating from start to finish. Then I'm going to talk about how to effectively work with the Cel Animator. So the first half is more for those who are interested in studying animation, and the second are for those who are looking to work with Cel Animators. So without further ado, let's dive in. Okay, the principles of animation. So I've provided a few examples of motion design artwork that execute the principles very well. The top three were provided by my friend Jordan Scott, and the bottom is by Boxfort. So I'm not going to explain all of the principles to you today, but I will give you a little bit of history. The principles were discovered by old Disney animators who sought to improve their work and make their animations more believable. So all of these principles were observed from nature as they were discovered by studying movement from people, animals, and etc. While I'm not always conscious of the principles of animation while I'm animating, they're always in the back of my mind as I'm working instinctively and as I'm making sure my animation feels right. But more often than not, when playing back my animation, I have to make sure to check certain parts of the certain principles, like checking my arcs, which is making sure everything's moving in a circular pattern, adding anticipation where needed so that there's some intentionality and there's like a mind behind my character's movement, as well as overlapping action, which is making sure different parts of the body is moving at different times and not all at once. So the principles ensure that your animation is smooth and believable. If there's anything that feels off about your animation, just run through the list and exaggerate it and add whatever you need. So yeah, the principles are essential in understanding how to put anything in motion, both shapes and characters alike. Okay. So let's go beyond the principles of animation just for a little bit. For a Cel Animator, understanding and utilizing those principles are just one tiny part of our study. These principles are explained in these books that Moses is holding for us. the Animator Survival Kit, and the Illusion of Life. If you don't own these books, there's something wrong. So you have to go get them. It's not just about bringing something into motion, but it's about the heart and the passion and the artist experience that brings a drawing to life. So I'm going to read you the quotes. In animation, we start with a blank piece of paper. Out of nowhere, we have to come up with characters that are real, that live, that interrelate. We have to work up the chemistry between them and find ways to create the counterpart of charisma, have the characters move in a believable manner, and do it all with mere pencil drawings. That's very challenging. Good drawing is not copying the surface. It has to do with understanding and expression. We don't want to learn to draw just to end up being imprisoned and showing off our knowledge of joints and muscles. So what's the goal of an animator? It's to create something of their own that appears to be living, a vitality, a separate identity, something that speaks out with authority, a creation that gives the illusion of life. Okay, so drawing. So in order to become a good 2D character animator, you have to be a good draftsman. Figure and gesture drawing are key in understanding the perspective of human anatomy, shape and form, as well as creating a solid drawing and a clear silhouette, which is also one of the principles of animation. Most of the time, when you're blocking rough animation, your drawings are probably gonna resemble this, very simple. There's typically 12 to 24 drawings in each second of cel animation, which is why it's super important to practice gesture drawing. So especially time gesture drawing exercises in which every 10, 20, or 30 seconds, you draw a new pose. So that teaches you to draw quickly with clear lines of action, which I indicated in red. So doing time gesture drawing exercises allow you to be loose and not be too precious with your drawings. 100% of the time, I have to delete, rework, and redraw my animation a few times before I feel final, so sketching quickly is a must. Okay, observation. I don't know why it's dropping a frame, but it's okay. Observation is key when studying animation. From the Illusion of Life, it states, just because we had named some of the new principles of animation did not mean that we understood it or grasped the extent of its possibilities. Constant study and searching had brought us that far, and more study was on the way to keep advancing. So one of the best ways to understand the principles and apply them to your work as a character animator is to gather as much reference as you can. So take a look at the things that inspire you, go to the park and watch how people move and how they walk. Try to observe the difference between the physical movements of a young person versus an older person. That will help you when you have to animate those characters. I included a couple films that inspire me, The Red Shoes and It's a Wonderful Life, because they inspire me because I find so much personality and texture that I wouldn't be able to come up with on my own. So there's a lot of subtleties that you can apply to your animation simply by being aware of your surroundings and the people around you. That's why it's always important to constantly be on the lookout so that you can build a mental library that you can reach into to keep your ideas fresh and unique. On the same topic of observation, I wanted to include a popular YouTube video of an animator acting out her scenes for Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which is one of my favorite movies. I would have shared my own reference, but it's just too embarrassing. Somebody already did it, so I'm gonna just show you them. When I'm struggling to animate, usually it's because I didn't act it out or shoot reference. Whether the shot is complicated or simple, I have to act it out because I wouldn't know how to animate it otherwise. Okay, applied learning. So what do you do while you're becoming a better draftsman and while you're studying reference? You apply what you've learned. And I animated these examples just to show you that by studying video reference and body mechanics, human anatomy, I can loosely animate what I've learned. So in the top middle is my example of squash and stretch. Also at the bottom, you realize that different parts of the body move in opposite directions, and one part leads while the other follows. You also learn that the line of action is usually in the direction of which force is applied. And so you can take the principles of animation and apply them and create a fairly vanilla performance, but then you can add loads of flavor by adding personality to your character. So never stop learning. Okay, well, even though I talked about all those things, most of the time I'm animating this. But still, I still think about all of those things while I'm animating. Okay, so I don't know if this is something that you already know or not, but I want to go over it anyway. So traditional or Cel animators animate frame by frame. Some genius a long time ago figured out that there's 24 frames per second. So if we're animating on ones, that means there's that 1 second equals 24 frames. In other words, 24 drawings are exposed once per frame of film. If you're animating on twos, that means 1 second equals 12 drawings. And each drawing is exposed for 2 frames each. So there aren't that many rules in regards to whether you should animate on ones, twos, threes, or even fours. It's mostly instinct. So it's known that animating on ones is best for fast actions, but it would be unwise to work completely this way because you need a whole lot more drawings to do more slower actions and subtle animation, where twos and even threes will reduce some of that workload and still be relatively smooth. So this is an example by Richard Williams, the same guy who created the Animator's Survival Kit. This animation is super smooth, but it looks very mechanical because it's all on ones, and it lacks weight and spontaneity. So it's important to add variety with ones, twos, and threes in your work. So the pose is one of the most important parts of animation. It is the most important, I think. So it's not just about how smooth you can get your animation to be, but it's about how you pose your characters. So this is an animation that I did on twos a few years ago. Animating on twos cut the workload down, but the animation is still nice and smooth. When I say cut the workload down, I don't mean that it's easy and there's still a lot of drawings. But you can see here that twos does the job just fine, and animating on ones would be entirely unnecessary. But again, you can use ones and twos interchangeably. But you won't really know until you play your animation, and then you can see where to add the texture. Okay, if you're still confused, I have my friend and colleague, Mel, who's also a brilliant Cel animator, to explain this better to you. So here.
Hello, I'm talking to you today about ones, twos, and threes when referring to Cel animation. So right now you're looking at a pencil test down shooter, which is to capture traditional animation. I'm hitting the spacebar twice to capture that image for 2 frames, and you can see there that it's on there for that amount of time. This is after finishing the entire shoot, so the whole stack of paper has been shot, exposing each image for 2 frames. Now I'm flipping through to show you that it's lasting for 2 exposures per frame, and that's why we refer to it as twos, because it's being held for 2 frames. Here is the animation on twos. Here it is slowed down, so you can see that it's holding for those 2 frames. This is on ones, which is much faster, so it's only holding for 1 frame. This is threes here, which means it's holding for 3 frames. And here it is slowed down at 3 frames, so it makes that much slower. And then here it is mixed. So we have mostly twos, a couple of threes, and a one. And traditional animators will do this sometimes just to create variety in the animation.
Yeah, thanks, Mel, for doing that. Okay, so here's a side-by-side example of cell animation in 24 frames per second and 60 frames per second. And I just can't think of any reason as to, like, why? Why does anybody want to animate in 60 frames per second? Having more frames in your animation doesn't really make it better. It just, it's a bit distracting, actually, with how smooth it is. It doesn't give you, as the audience, time to look at the character performance and to fill in those frames with your own imagination. Everything is just filled in for you. So in this example, there's nothing that 60 frames per second is doing to enhance the animation or the performance of the characters. But the 24 frame per second example shows that this frame rate is all you need in order to create a clear and entertaining animation that conveys exactly what it needs to the audience. Okay, so all of this to say that it's not about frame count, but about how the animation feels. The best part of cell animation is running wild with your imagination and trusting your intuition. Okay, so I'm gonna go over the stages of animation with you. So there's 3. There's rough, tie down, and cleanup. And so we'll start with roughs. I had video reference of myself in that corner, but I took it out because it was embarrassing. I'm using a few examples of the shots I worked on for Netflix, We the People. So these are my roughs, and as you can see, they're not that far from being stick figures, but that doesn't matter because at this point, it's just about getting the movement right, and at this stage, lots of video reference was provided for me, but I also I did my own video reference for every single shot. Just to get the performance right and make sure I understand what's happening with the body mechanics of this character. And also I had to keep in mind that this is a very confident character. She is the President of the United States, so I had a lot of fun trying to figure that out. So it was really fun taking bits of the reference that was provided as well as my own reference, just to add some of my own personality in there and make the character come alive. So we can't build a visual library in our heads if we don't study what we're trying to animate. And I'm not talking about taking reference and rotoscoping it, but actually sitting down and frame by framing your reference to understand what's happening in the body so that you know how to do it. And understanding the physics and how it affects your character. Okay, without reference, I will have no idea how to animate anything. So that's super important. Okay, tie down. So these are my tie downs for the same shots. At this point, I'm already committed to the action, and any changes that need to happen should happen in rough animation where it's really easy to go back and delete frames. But at this point, I'm just trying to stay on model. These are the character designs by Benji Brook for the president and for the kid, who I only animated once. But at this point, I'm just trying to finesse the line work and fix any mistakes that I didn't address in the roughs. So it would be really difficult to make any major changes at this stage. Okay, and finally, cleanup. So this is a stage where everything is locked in with final color and final line. A whole different crew handled cleanup, but most of the time I have to do it myself. Just remember that all of these stages are redrawn, so the amount of work that goes into it is a lot. Okay, so last topic, working with the Cel Animator. So the scope of the project tends to drive the quality of the animation. Within a healthy production timeline, the animator can be in their element, they can add texture, volume, detail. If they have to animate camera moves by hand, they'll have time to do so. The animation will just have more calories by animating on twos, and we can concentrate on filming our reference and making acting choices. The more time an animator has, the better the animation will be. After all, we are taking a single style frame and multiplying it by hundreds. So that's a lot. Regardless of whether the project calls for intricate or limited animation, time is the crucial ingredient to achieve great animation. Because we just want to do that kind of stuff, which is really fun. On the contrary, an unhealthy, I'm sorry if anybody is in here who worked on this, it's okay. On the contrary, an unhealthy timeline makes it impossible for the animation or the animator to to think about the project before diving into the computer. They'd have to expedite or completely leave out essential processes like gathering reference and sketching and thumbnailing their ideas before feeling comfortable to execute them. Lack of time means creating a not so smooth animation with no volume or three-dimensionality to the characters. Now, this animation it's smooth, but that's all it is. There's nothing else there. So without time, it would have to be a limited color palette, and the animation would just be flat and uninspiring. So regardless of whether or not the project calls for intricate or limited animation, time is the crucial ingredient to great animation. So here I added an example of how many drawings it takes to take an animation from start to finish. So combining my roughs with tie down and cleanup, we're looking at 420 drawings, which were all redone, because that's the process. So animation takes forever. Julie, thank you for doing the After Effects stuff for this, because I can't do that. Okay, so adapting or design to animation. As many of you know, Cel Animators have to adapt to the design of any given project. Another helpful thing to keep in mind when designing characters is thinking about how the design will affect the animator's work. Here's an example of the evolution of Felix the cat. Felix the cat was one of the first characters to be traditionally animated in 1923, I think. His original design is very rigid and kind of creepy, and it made it difficult for animation. The animators realized that changing Felix's shape into one with more volume freed the animators to animate the character as they pleased. Now, the principles of animation was still being developed, And some of them have not been named yet at this point, but you can see that the more rounded Felix the cat has a clearer silhouette and just an easier design to look at. So I think it's important to know that the flatter and more rigid the character design is, the flatter and rigid the animation is going to be. Then again, despite the character design, the animator they will have a much easier time animating if character sheets were provided. So it's super useful to have a model sheet that contains at least a front view, a profile, and a 3/4 view of the character. If character sheets aren't provided, it would be super difficult to guess what the character looks like, which is really hard for animation. And especially if you want to turn the character and add three-dimensionality. So character sheets are super useful if you intend for the characters to walk around and turn. This example is very stylized, but I broke the character down into shapes so that I could use that as a guide to stay on model. Okay, here's another example provided by Sarah Beth Morgan. You can tell that this is the same character, but without, again, the character sheet, I wouldn't know how to make the character look like she's supposed to. Okay, so animatics. Animatics are key for animators to understand what's happening in each shot. Here's an animatic that was provided by Oddfellows on a project that I worked last year. Animatics can be like super simple. They don't have to have too much movement, but for animators, it would be nice to have a bit of movement in the characters just so that we have an easier time understanding what they're doing. Animators are actors behind a computer, so understanding what the character is doing and receiving that direction and guidance will go a long way. Okay, last topic. Yes. Making changes. I wanted to share a shot that I animated at Gunner. The entire background of the shot was animated prior to Cel Animation. So I had After Effects on one monitor and Photoshop on the other. And I was constantly saving Photoshop to make sure that the character was moving with the background, which was really difficult. I just wanted to see like the updates, and I had to redo so many drawings. But as you can, like if the camera move in the background was changed at any point while I was animating, I would have to redo so much. And the style of this piece was, like I had to use the hard round brush, which is hard when cleaning up. So again, it would be fine if changes were made during the rough animation process, but when you're going into cleanup, it's really difficult. And again, there's 105 drawings here, and that's a lot. Just saying. Okay, so here's a screenshot or a screen recording of my timeline in TV Paint for this shot that I did with Hornet. There are so many layers involved just because there's a lot of texture going on here. There's a lot of overlapping action with her hair and her scarf and her jacket, just overlapping everything. And it would be almost impossible to go back and navigate through those layers to move things around if changes were made while doing cleanup. So what I would like for cleanup is for it to be like coloring a coloring book. Like you don't have to think about it, and that's the goal. Okay, so just remember, animation is like toothpaste. You can't put it back in the tube, right? Okay. So I know there's a lot to learn when pursuing cell animation, but it's super enriching and rewarding. So I encourage everybody to try their hand at it, and you might come to love it. Okay, thank you.